We can now read the text for this morning, which comes from 1 Thessalonians 4. And we'll read verses 9 through 12. It's 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we'll start at verse 9. Now about your love for one another, we do not need to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all of God's family throughout Macedonia. Yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more, and to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody. As for the reading of God's Word. Brothers and sisters, one of the more famous hymns that we have even in our own book of praise, it's by the great hymn writer Isaac Watts. And the hymn is, O God, our help in ages past. We have it in our book of praise as hymn 54. This hymn is adapted from Psalm 90. And stanza 6 of the hymn goes like this. The busy tribes of flesh and blood, with all their lives and cares, are carried downward by the flood and lost in following years. And it's curious that Watts writes, the busy tribes of flesh and blood, with all their lives and cares. Isn't that what this world is? It's a world of chaos and noise, distraction and arguing and posturing and politics. The tribes of humanity in their flesh and blood, unspiritual, are so noisily busy with so many cares and concerns. There's a recent cover of a New Yorker magazine that I saw. And a person on the cover was a picture of someone pushing a shopping buggy through a supermarket. And the things on offer were anger, resentment, this, that, all these. What is there to buy in this world? Anger about this, concern about this, alarm about that. And in such a world, what should our contribution as Christians be? As spiritual people who've been filled with God, how should we be in a world of busy, noisy concern? I think sometimes in a world like this, sometimes in our attempts to resist the noise and the chaos, we join it by making more noise. So what is our role as Spirit-filled Christians in such a noisy, chaotic world? And it's fascinating that in our text for today, the Apostle Paul has a clear answer. He says, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. And I've titled it, Be Ambitious for Tranquility. What a countercultural command. And so what is the Apostle Paul saying here? And I want to work out what he's saying here. And I think we'll find it instructive. And we ought to start on verse 9. And if you look at verse 9, you'll see where Paul starts with this command. And then he uses verses 9 and 10 to preface verse 11. You'll notice in verse 9, Paul starts and he says, Now about your love for one another, we do not need to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all of God's family throughout Macedonia, yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more. And so what the Apostle Paul is doing here is he's saying something he said a few times already. He's been very emphatic about how the Thessalonians have been very good at loving each other. The word he uses, Philadelphia's. You might recognize that word, the city of brotherly love we call Philadelphia. The Thessalonians have been very good at loving each other and caring for each other. And he says, this is great. Overall, things are good. But, verse 11, there is a bit of a problem in Thessalonica, and a few of you are engaging in problematic behavior. And this is how we get to verse 11. Your love for each other, we don't even need to talk about it, it's so good. But some of you are living noisy lives. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands. Apparently, some of the Thessalonians were not doing this. So what does it mean then to live what we could call a noisy life versus the quiet life encouraged by Paul? Now, you should know, and I have to be honest here, every interpreter and pastor who preached on this passage had a different opinion, and radically different, frankly. If you listen to sermons on this passage, you might get a range of thoughts. And after reading through it all, my sense is that the right way to go about it has to do with what we would call the Roman cultural system of patronage. This passage makes no sense unless we think about how Romans and Greeks thought in this way. And so what is patronage? And you got to bear with me here. Once I explain this, I think you'll see where we're going. In ancient Rome and Greece, society is organized according to patron-client relationships. What is that? Well, if you're poor in Rome and Greece, you protected yourself by becoming a client of a rich, powerful man, your patron. The patron would protect you legally in the courts. He would advocate for you if you got into trouble, and he would even provide you food. In return, if you were the client, you were expected to support the patron politically. You were to honor him publicly. You were to do unsavory errands for him, potentially. You were to cheer loudly as he walked through the city. You had to greet him in the streets. One example of this is that every morning the client was responsible to visit the patron and greet him. They call it salutatio, where we get the term salute from. And of course, patrons could be clients to more powerful patrons. And the whole system dominated Roman culture. And there were all these networks set up. Why? And the whole thing was designed to promote political power for the patron. In our culture, I think this sort of works the same way in some ways. You can think of a politician, for example, in Canada who has a large following. And when the politician gets in power, he hires all his friends, and he gives them powerful positions, and in return, all of these friends and clients, they promote him and protect him. Patronage. But in Rome and Greece, patronage had a dirty side. At its best, patronage could be like a political party. But at its worst, it was more like a mafia gang network. You can think of a mafia boss surrounded by his henchmen. And they support him and they do dirty jobs for him. Curiously, in Spanish-speaking culture, mobsters like Pablo Escobar called themselves patron, patron. And it was not uncommon in Rome and Greece for these patron-client networks to engage in political violence. All sorts of social disorder was instigated as these groups fought with each other. There's all sorts of factionalism and division and dirty behavior. And it seems that in the Thessalonican church, certain members of the church were part of these networks. They were clients. And instead of working and earning a living, they instead served as the patron's flunkies, hanging around his house, eating his food, and doing his dirty jobs. Being hired muscle on the street. And it seems that Paul has this in view when he gives this command. And he says, don't do that. That is not helpful for the church or for you. Instead, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, minding your own business and working with your hands. And you can see the kind of disorder this patron-client system brought into the church. You can see that you can have clients from multiple systems in the church fighting with each other. It sort of reminds me of churches in areas where there are rival gangs. I remember a story from a pastor I knew in Jersey City near New York. His church ran a basketball program in the city, and it was dangerous because people who came to the program came from rival gangs, and every now and then there would be a fight, and the police would have to come. I think there's some of this going on, and Paul is saying, get out. Do not participate in that stuff. You, Thessalonians, belong to Jesus. He is your patron. Not wealthy, powerful men. You do not need them for protection. You now have Jesus. You are Jesus' client. Now listen, if a patron did something for a client, did a favor for his client, you know what they called that in Greece? Grace. And if a client did something for his patron and was trustworthy, do you know what they called that? Faith. So now you begin to see how Paul's preaching of the gospel is absolutely making sense to the Romans because they knew how this all worked. Jesus is the ultimate patron who gives grace to those who have faith, who trust him. And so those who follow Jesus don't need to be part of unhealthy political networks in their city, because Jesus, their patron, protects them and such. So, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. In other words, withdraw from unhealthy political and societal systems that promote instability and evil in your life. And we know Paul was talking about politics here because in a similar passage which we read earlier, 1 Timothy 2, Paul says something very similar to what he says in this passage. If you read that passage, you'll see what I mean. Where he says, he urges that petitions, prayers, and intercession and thanksgiving be made for all people. And who? For kings and all those in authority. Why? That we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. And here you have living a quiet life is explicitly connected to your political relationships. And so that shows us that in this passage in 1 Thessalonians 4, politics is mostly in view. And it's fascinating that Paul says he says your job as a Christian in relation to your politicians is first to pray for them. And not to pray that you get your way or that your favorite policies are in favor. No, to praise what? That you may be able to live a peaceful and quiet life so that you may promote godliness and holiness. Interesting, isn't it? Now, what is a quiet life exactly? In 1 Thessalonians 4, well, there's two meanings to this word. Meaning number one, it is to refrain from disturbing others. And if you read the Greek literature of the time, what this word was used for someone who refrained from making public disturbances in the city. Some Greek writers saw this as to retire from political affairs. Interesting. And the second meaning is to refrain from speaking in general, to keep your opinions to yourself and not be noisy and interfering in other people's business. And so, of course, you can see Paul underlines this, mind your own business. I think now we can get to the applications now that I think this passage is explained properly. There's a few applications here, and bear with me. There's application number one is politics. It's clear to me that this passage is talking about unhealthy entanglement in dirty political systems. It's not to say that we cannot be involved in politics. The question is how. We have to be careful with our involvement as Christians because we have a higher belief. Because we serve God. We don't serve our city primarily or our country primarily. Now let me give you an example, and I mentioned this earlier. How does this work itself out? Well, I talked about the pastor who pastored in a dangerous neighborhood. If you pastor in a dangerous neighborhood, the neighborhood is often controlled by gangs. Often the pastor will know the gang leaders and be respected by the gang leaders. The gangs even protect the pastor if they have a good relationship. Now, let's imagine the pastor got involved in the gang in such a way that he favored one gang versus another. Well, if that happened, then members of the rival gang would not feel safe in his church and may even see him as a target. No, the wise pastor in a dangerous neighborhood, he's respected by everybody, but he's involved with none. His job in the neighborhood is to bring Jesus, not to determine who should be in power and who should not be in power. Now, this doesn't just work with gangs. This works with anything in our world. Business, politics, the city council. Do we as a church have a responsibility to involve ourselves in politics? And if so, how? Well, it seems to me that Paul is saying, actually, your desire, your ambition should be to live a quiet life. Not a noisy, interfering life. Why? Well, look at the final verse, verse 12. Right? It says, why? So that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody. The way you are involved in the systems of the world should win you respect from everybody. It's fascinating that Paul says we should pray for our leaders in 1 Timothy 2. This is what he wants us to do for our political leaders. Nowhere does the Bible suggest that we fully involve ourselves and pick a side and push the horse through. No. Withdraw from all that. I mean, you can still vote. Christians can be politicians. But the point is, if you're going to be involved in such a way that you promote peace, then you promote Christ, not each person's different policies and stuff. May no patron in the world get in the way of unity in this place. No matter who you vote for or what workplace you work in or what kind of work you do, in the church we have one patron, Jesus. We are not clients of something out there in a way that supersedes what we have here. And the world needs to understand that. That actually got the Roman church in a lot of trouble over time as the emperor said, no, I'm number one, buddy. And the Christians said, no, you're not. And they were persecuted for it. So to be frank, being a Republican should not be more important than serving Jesus, or a conservative, or a liberal, or an NDP. And I fear that in our Christian communities, the factions of the world threaten to tear us apart. We are too tempted to avoid a quiet life. Our ambition is instead to try to fix the world. Instead of living for Jesus here and now in our own context. I think at times we feel more at home in our favorite ideological community than we do in the church. And the question I would want to ask for a lot of us is, what is the ratio between the time that we spend praying and loving the people right in front of us versus the time spent and the mental energy spent thinking about our causes and our social media and promoting our opinions? I think every one of us has a ratio. Is it 90-10? Is it 70-30? Is it our ambition to lead a quiet, peaceful, loving life? Because we as Christians participate in our world with a view to eternity. We know that God will protect us in this world, not our favorite politician. That's why we pray, give us our daily bread. We don't say, may our business give us our daily bread. No, God will give us our daily bread. And we can't fix this world. And perhaps the best thing for many of us is to recognize that Jesus has to fix it, not us. And that the best thing that our politicians could do for us is to leave us alone so we can live in quietness, so that we can pursue holiness and godliness. And perhaps our love for our politicians is more important than the policies they might have. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. What does that mean? You know, people have commented on Tim Keller. There's this debate, if you don't know. And the debate is, you know, Tim Keller was gentle to everyone, even his opponents. And some have said these days that Tim Keller's approach will not work anymore because our world has become too hostile. We need to be frank and we need to tell people how it is. But others have noted that Tim Keller's gentleness was not a strategy, but just a way of being. We don't be gentle to our opponents just because it works. We do it because that's who we are. And I think this is the point. We don't exist for our pet causes. We exist to promote Jesus Christ. And what is it that promotes Jesus but living a quiet, peaceful life? A life of peace, a life of quietness. And politics is subservient to what Jesus wants. Make it your ambition. Now listen, this is important because here's the problem. The problem is that we as Christians, despite our desire to live peaceful lives, we often don't get to because people take it away from us. People destroy our peace. But the point is still, Paul is saying, it is your ambition to lead a quiet life, even if it may not be possible. Romans 12, verse 18, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with one another. Whatever they do, pray that God would take it away. You seek peace. Now, this is the first application. The second application follows. I think many of us, we live chaotic lives. We have difficult childhoods, maybe. We grew up in a difficult situation. Our lives were chaotic growing up, and we've carried that chaos onto our lives. Or maybe that's not true, and we just like having lots of chaos. Some of us are used to a chaotic, tempestuous way of living. We always feel the need to have some sort of drama or busyness in our lives. Otherwise, we get bored. We are not ambitious for tranquility or quietness. We are ambitious for noise. We have no regular routines. Our whole lives, we fly by the seat of our pants. And the result is that we are tired, haggard, and we don't really love people because that's too much work. Because we can't rest in here. And Paul is saying to those of us who live this way, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. Seek quietness. Seek a peace in your life. Seek not busyness, not being haggard all the time. Well, again, we may not have any choice given our situation, but that's not the point. The point is, what do you want? What are you working to? Maybe you've not been minding your own business and you've stuck your finger in so many things that you can't keep up. And here's the next thing, number 3. Some of us are allergic to what I would call the ordinary. We think our lives need to be exceptional, extraordinary, unusual, entertaining. This is part of the appeal of being a client, is that you can live life in the fast lane. Look at the power of the patron. Look how exciting he is. Look at how nice his house is, and I get to hang out there. Paul's saying, no. Live with little. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. How many of us are led astray by the impulse of, my life is too boring, I need to create excitement by doing more with my life? Some of it is dreaming and living a life in such a way that we improve our condition. Other times it's just vanity, as the book of Proverbs says. You know, I used to work in politics. I lived in downtown Toronto in Ottawa. And most of the people were there because they wanted to get out of their small town and they wanted to do something great with their life. They couldn't wait to get to the bright lights and the big smoke. But most of them learned, as I did, that life and power can empty the soul. If you want excitement in your life, if you want power, if you want influence, sooner or later the temptation to sell your soul becomes enormous. I remember the painful stories of other people I met. There was one woman who came to Toronto to be a model. She came from a small town. She wanted to make it in the big city. And her desire to succeed led her to associate with people who were not good. Men and agencies who took advantage. Now, they were not nice people, but why did she associate with them? Why was she involved with such people? Her ambition down here, I don't want to be, or it's not enough to live in a small town. It's not enough to just be married and have a family. I need to do this and this and this, and these men will help me get it there. And well, she was left empty and broken. How many of us live like this? The quiet life's not good enough. What's in front of me isn't good enough. The people that are right here, that love me, they're not enough. God's not enough. Jesus isn't enough. We can't live a quiet life because Christ has not captivated us. Something else needs to captivate us. Christ is not enough. And it goes to church too. Oh, this church isn't good enough. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles. It doesn't make me feel the way I want to feel all the time. I need this other thing. This is noisier, more exciting. And ironically, churches are noisier sometimes, aren't they? What are they doing if they give you more noise? What do you think? Can you go to the churches of Brampton and say, is it this church's ambition to have for us to lead a quiet life when every time we walk in the doors, they fill our ears with noise? Why are we ambitious for what the busy tribes of flesh and blood are doing? What is it that they have that's not enough here? Why are we ambitious for all this? I think we need to reassess what we honor sometimes too. Do we honor the entrepreneur who's destroyed his family to promote his tech company? Or do we honor the man who works an ordinary job that he probably doesn't love because he drives an ordinary car with some rust on it? But this is a man who's home on the weekends and home at night, and he's there to raise his family. This is Father's Day today. Do we honor the man who's made sacrifices in his life, being less great in his career so that his children can grow? The point is not whether we're doing this or not. Is that what we honor? Do we honor the mother who gives her life for her children? who may not have a lot to say in conversation because she's been at home all day with her children, and that doesn't always produce things to share on the weekend at church. Who makes a humble home. Or maybe who works a job she doesn't really want to, but she has to make things work. She gives every single thing in her power to promote her children and their flourishing. We don't see what she does, but she does it. Does this humble person deserve our honor, or does this famous blogger deserve our honor? You don't need to write a blog to be worthy. You don't need to work in downtown Toronto to live a worthy life. You don't have to be part of a big corporation. You don't have to have a big house. Do what's in front of you well. Mind your own business. Work with your hands. And be quiet. Dare to be ordinary. And you know what? God will probably exalt and bless you. He will do it. You don't need to do it. It's such a radical teaching in such a noisy, busy world of tribes of flesh and blood. Here's number 4. How many of us have realized that we can't escape our situation? We can't move. We can't find a new career. And so our distraction is not radical change. Our distraction is our phone, TV. How many of us, we can't be quiet. So we bombard ourselves with TV and music and noise and phone all day, every day. And when the TV is boring, then we go to social media and we have loud debates. And then we listen to loud YouTube videos from loud people who are always angry for some reason. And then these things make us irritable and unsettled, and then because we're irritable and unsettled, we go and get more of it. And pretty soon our whole life is this swirling circle of noise and anger. We all think we need to comment on everything that's happening. Everyone needs to hear my opinion. I need to interfere with everybody's life because I know what's the truth. Everyone's an activist these days. Something that would have made no sense to our... let me correct that. Something that makes no sense to our grandparents right now, who built their lives by working with their hands, who spoke with their hands rather than their mouth. What is it that we think the busy tribes of flesh and blood are going to give us? Paul says, enough. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, minding your own business. Do what's in front of you well. Then maybe people later on will ask you for advice. We have this tendency to meddle as busybodies too. We see something we don't like in the church, and so we butt in with our opinion. We can't mind our own business. Paul says, no, mind your own business. You know what? If you mind your own business well, people might ask you out for your opinion. You gain the right to speak when you work with your hands, producing something of value, minding your own business, and being quiet. Then when you actually do say something, people listen. Which leads us to the final command of Paul, which is to work with your hands. Why? Well, in verse 12 he says, so that you will not be dependent on anybody. Instead of living as a dependent client, work for a living. No, not all of us can work. I understand that. But the point is whether we want to. I think that's the key. In Ephesians 4, verse 28, Paul talks about if you work with your hands, that you will have something to provide for those in need. Now, you might say here, for example, the call to be quiet would mean retirement. It would be a retreat from work. But Paul doesn't say that. He says part of the quiet life is to be productive, producing things of value. The quiet life is a working life. Even Jesus worked, we assumed, as a carpenter. And in Greek and Roman culture, they considered manual work to be beneath. Only slaves did that. And Paul says, no. In the kingdom of Jesus Christ, labor is honorable and good. It's noble. Through labor, we make things people need. Through labor, we earn money to provide for ourselves and for those who need it. And in labor, we provide for ourselves and we avoid unhealthy systems of dependency. And in the ancient, in this Thessalonican church, it would have been the client system, but also would have been the church. People weren't working, and so therefore people in the church had to feed them. Now again, I'm saying some people cannot work. That's different. Then we as a church must help. But if you can work and you don't, well, that's not good. You become a drain on society. And so Paul says, no, mind your own business. Stop worrying about what other people are doing. You work, contribute to your own situation, get that in order, and serve Christ in holiness and godliness where you are. And then you will experience the joy of Jesus' service. There's no higher gift in life than knowing that you're useful to Christ. That in some infinitesimal way, your conduct in some way has been good for the kingdom of Jesus Christ. How does one contribute to the kingdom of Jesus Christ? Well, Paul has given you a pretty good summary. We don't contribute to the kingdom of Jesus Christ with brashness and noisiness. No, but by being sober, peaceful, loving, gentle, contributing, encouraging. Now, to finish, you might have a question as to why. Why ultimately live this way? I mean, Paul says so, that's fine. But why? It even sounds attractive. Maybe I will do that. But why? Brothers and sisters, the point is that this is how Jesus lived. Jesus lived a quiet life, working with his hands and minding his own business. That may sound striking. But Jesus did not really insert himself into other people's situations. Almost entirely in his life, people come to him. In fact, Jesus' ambition, as we would often see in his own life, is to get out and to pray on a mountain. You can see there's this craving almost in his heart for tranquility and peace. And the people that surround him, they create just so much noise for him, and he's just sort of eventually has to get away and talk to God. And Jesus was flawless in his brotherly love. He was never in a hurry. He did not get involved in local politics. He never took sides in the debates of the day. He said, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. He's asked to comment on a political issue, and he does not. He was never unduly ruffled by the anger of those or the noise of the people around him. He did not ask to be killed. He did not try to be killed. He did not try to create a disturbance. It all came to him. And he was well regarded by everyone as a result, even by his enemies, even though his goodness inflamed their hate. They didn't hate him because he did things that were not so good. They hated him because he was so full of peace. The political affairs of the tribes of flesh and blood were of very little concern to him. It was not the main thing. No, to him, following his Father's will. This was the key. Showing love in every circumstance, healing, prayer, speaking truth, preaching. These things were all what he did. And he wanted peace in every relationship. Of course, it was not achieved. More than anyone else, Jesus is a quiet man, a tranquil man, a man of shalom, of peace. And it's not just that Jesus is these things. Every one of us has the Spirit of Jesus in us. What is the Holy Spirit trying to do in your life? It's trying to bring Jesus out of you, to mold you into Jesus, to mold you into the shalom, quiet person. A person who will not be a burden on others because he or she does their best to contribute as they can. A person who has the respect of outsiders because he or she does not overextend. No. This Spirit is producing this quiet, gentle spirit. And in God, this can be done. And then we, as this church, becomes an oasis in a noisy world, rather than adding burdens. Tall order. Only Jesus can do this, and he is doing it. So brothers and sisters, go to him. Be filled with him. And don't think that following him makes you more busy, more noisy, more this, more that. No. It seems here that being filled with Jesus is to calm us and slow us, to retreat often, and to pray. And then love will begin to appear. So go to him, brothers and sisters, in peace, and he will give you his peace. Amen.